you're very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth with Fintan Dunne. Thanks for joining me, folks. Good to be here with you. And we're going to take a look at the implosion of the New World Order papacy of Pope Francis. What's that? Well, it's political stuff, and it also involves the sexual abuse issue, and also the gay mafia within the church, and the financial corruption within the church, and the story of what happened when Archbishop Vigano investigated all this stuff for Benedict, and much, much more. We're going to get into all of that because, you know, it was the visit to Ireland by Francis that really was the moment when it all came apart. Because while Francis was in Ireland, and it was disappointingly attended by Irish Catholics, the events which the Pope was featuring in, allegations came out from Archbishop Vigano that indeed the Pope had known that sexual predator Cardinal McCarrick was a sexual predator, and had nevertheless, despite that fact, used him and allied himself with McCarrick for political purposes. And when it came time for Pope Francis to deny those allegations, instead he told everybody to go and read the allegations more carefully, and he might talk about it sometime, maybe never, who knows. As that was happening in Ireland, this was happening and has happened in the United States.
The nightmare scenario for the U.S. hierarchy is now beginning to unfold as state after state announces plans for full-blown investigations into every Catholic diocese for covering up sexual abuse, the overwhelming amount of which has been homosexual predation of physically mature males, some minors, others young adults. And that cover-up they are investigating, of course, is cover-up by bishops. Now we can take a look at this map here to get an idea of just how widening this is becoming. Of course, it all began with Pennsylvania, which has concluded its investigation. And now we have Missouri, Illinois, Nebraska, New Mexico, and of course just yesterday, both New York and New Jersey following on each other by just a couple of hours. Also sitting on the sideline for the moment is Florida, which many are expecting to announce shortly. The announcements yesterday by New York and New Jersey prompted Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, who spearheaded the Pennsylvania investigation, to say this, quote, "Our work in Pennsylvania has spurred a movement." Yes, it has. "The time for institutions to place their own interests above protecting our children is over," closed quote.
Now, that is a signal moment, isn't it? The time to allow these institutions to have the responsibility for protecting our children is over. And as you see, investigations springing up across the United States, and those investigations will, according to some of the reporters you're watching there from Church Militant, a conservative Christian organization that's well up to speed, has its own ideological reasons for being up to speed on the defects of the Francis's papacy, but they believe that we're headed for a full-blown federal investigation here, and I think the signs are pointing in that direction. So, Michael Voris of Church Militant, would an investigation of the scale of this?
A coordinated effort between multiple states' attorneys general and the Department of Justice would mean much more would mean the likelihood of a RICO investigation that higher-ups in the Vatican have been fearing for weeks, because it would directly embroil the Vatican in all of this. That would be the nightmare scenario for the Francis pontificate, especially given the bombshell revelations of Archbishop Vigano 2 weeks ago, where he directly tied American hierarchy into the cover-ups along with Pope Francis. And further to all of this, Church Militant has also learned that Cardinals McCarrick and Wuerl were both working behind the scenes with Pope Francis's Vatican, anticipating and preparing for a Hillary victory in 2016. Of course, Our Lady took care of that, laying the groundwork for the Vatican to start working with a Clinton White House to advance a worldwide liberal agenda. That, of course, as you know, did not happen. What has happened instead is a frosty relationship between Rome and Washington, D.C., even somewhat visible during the May 2017 visit of President Donald Trump to the Vatican to see the Pope. Sources tell Church Militant that in the private meeting between the two leaders, away from the cameras, President Trump let the Pope know that he was soon going to sign an executive order, he was having it prepared, regarding human rights violations and penalties that was partially being drawn up to address the sex abuse crisis and its cover-up in the church. True to his word, Trump did indeed sign such an order on December 21st of the same year, just 6 months later. And the threat of that order's penalties, which is confiscation of property, is what sent various dioceses around the country scrambling to establish victims' compensation funds, a strategy of sort of beating the feds to the punch. Now, the two major linchpins, the connections between Pope Francis and the Hillary campaign and its liberal agenda were the now disgraced and former cardinal homosexual predator Theodore McCarrick, protected by an entire cadre of senior U.S. churchmen who profited from his remaining in power, as well as current Washington, D.C. Archbishop Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who is under withering fire to step down and disappear and has remained defiant in the face of those calls. Church Militant reported exclusively last week that Wuerl has been planning a potential escape plan out of the U.S. should a federal investigation officially fire up and he becomes a target. According to our sources, he has been in consultations with the Pope regarding fleeing the U.S. for Rome if and when such a time comes, as the Vatican deems it necessary. Now,
and there you hear a casual discussion of the plans for a member of the Catholic hierarchy to potentially flee the United States. You know, that's an indication to you that for the church to get away with this, there's always been a need to have, in effect, political cover. And of course, the state has been in bed with the church in Ireland and in the United States and other jurisdictions. So they have collective guilt and a collective reason to cover each other's back, despite, fighting each other publicly. So what has happened in the context of the current Trump presidency is that the political cover has been removed from the Catholic Church at the same time as an emboldened laity and critical commentators who have access to the internet are able to put the kind of pressure on that you have never seen before. This is coming both from a grassroots level, from a criminal justice level now in the United States, and also coming out of the corruption itself, which is in the Catholic Church. Christine Niles of Church Militant has some good advice for prosecutors.
As attorneys general who are launching these investigations, they might want to very seriously consider launching surprise raids on the chanceries, just as they did in Saginaw. They raided the bishop's house. Right there you can see it, Bishop Joseph Stone's home. They took all of his electronics and they're still combing through it now. They raided the chancery and they raided the cathedral rectory, and they did find bags of shredded documents. Now, we know Sistone comes with a history of shredding documents. He does. He comes from Philadelphia.
He has the name Bishop Shredder.
That's his nickname, Bishop Shredder.
By other bishops.
Other bishops have named him Bishop Shredder. Well, there's one who called him that to his face, and fisticuffs almost broke out. But we know from a 2005 grand jury report in Philadelphia that Sistone was involved in covering up shredding documents. So these attorneys general, be smart. You've announced these investigations. These bishops, don't trust them, to be honest. I mean, they're willing to cover up predator priests who've raped and assaulted and preyed upon the young and the vulnerable and vulnerable adults. Don't put it past them to be destroying documents that incriminate them.
Yeah, if you just...
And there's more.
The other thing that's very interesting about this, it didn't really get a lot of play at the time, but back in 2017, Donald Trump signed an executive order. He signed a lot of executive orders. This one we see right here, human rights abuse and corruption. Now, this allows for the seizing of assets of foreign individuals who are involved in human rights violations, and also allows for the seizing of assets of United States citizens and inhabitants who are involved in human rights violations being carried out by a foreign organization. That sounds a lot like the church, and that apparently is what Donald Trump said to the Pope. You reported on this yesterday. He said to the Pope at their meeting, and he said, Holy Father, I'm going to sign this executive order. It could be bad for the church. So you bring those two together, that executive order, RICO, you hand those to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice can do what a bunch of attorneys general are doing, but writ large, and you can bring the whole thing together.
And, this is where it all starts to connect up, because Pope Francis is in trouble precisely in the United States, which is now the the place which is going to see, I think, the most determined investigation of these issues that you've ever seen. So it's a perfect storm. And the roots of it do go back a long way. Now, they go back, and Vigano, who is making these recent allegations, is no newcomer. He knows where the bodies are buried because he was aware of this back as far as 2010, 2012, and Pope Benedict was aware of this. So the roots of this corruption are to be found in those spectacular series of events when we saw the unprecedented resignation of Pope Benedict, which ushered in Francis as his replacement. So let's take a look now at some of those issues and examine with Dr. Taylor Marshall the background to this scandal and how deep this particular rabbit hole goes. Take a look at a few minutes of this.
Pope Benedict XVI is unnerved, and he commissions an investigation. He chooses 3 of his most trusted cardinals to do an investigation on the irregularities at the Vatican Bank and to find out who these people are. And these 3 cardinals were Cardinal Herranz. He's a Spanish cardinal. He's a member of Opus Dei, and he served as the chair of this investigation committee. Also, Cardinal Joseph Tomko. He's Slovak, and he's bi-ritual. He serves in the Roman Rite and the Eastern churches, I think the Byzantine jurisdiction, but I'm not quite sure on that. And then also Salvatore de' Giorgi, who's an Italian. These 3 men did a secret investigation for Pope Benedict XVI. They prepared a 300-page dossier inside of a red binder and presented it to Pope Benedict XVI on December 17th, 2012. This red binder with 300 pages in it documented financial corruption, but also deep moral corruption, allegedly describing Vatican hierarchs and cardinals dressed in drag with lewd details about them given by Roman male prostitutes. And so at this point, it becomes clear to Pope Benedict that the financial irregularities are also related to moral irregularities related to homosexuality inside the walls of Vatican City. By the way, December 17th, the day he receives this red binder dossier and reads it, is the day reportedly that Pope Benedict XVI realized, I am not up for this challenge, I'm going to resign. Just to make a connection, the binder was given on December 17th, 2012. It was on December 22nd, 5 days later, that Pope Benedict pardoned his butler, Paolo. And this has led some, including myself, to wonder, perhaps the leak was on purpose. Why would the butler do all this if he's a very close friend to Ratzinger Benedict, and then go through the whole process of a trial and then get pardoned within days of this binder by Benedict XVI? It's a little unclear, but something's going on there as well. Now, just a couple weeks after he receives the binder and reportedly decides to resign, pressure is placed upon him. On January 1st, 2013, the ATM machines inside Vatican City, these are the machines that people who work there use to get cash, to get money, they cease to work. And all the Vatican bank accounts are reportedly closed, so much so that the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican museums, can only accept cash because the systems are down. On February 11th, so a month and 11 days later, Pope Benedict XVI announces publicly that he is going to resign the papacy. The very next day, on February 12th, 2013, a Swiss company called the Aduno Group takes over the operation of the Vatican ATM cash machine, and by doing so circumvents the Italian and EU regulatory pressures. On February 28th, Pope Benedict officially resigned the papacy, and we entered into an interregnum. On March 13th, 2013, Pope Francis was elected by the College of Cardinals. What's interesting is just a few months after the election of Pope Francis, in June 2013, the money laundering case against the ex-head of the Vatican Bank, Goto Tedici, was dropped. And around the same time, Pope Francis appointed Monsignor Battista Mario Salvatore Rica as the interim head for the Vatican Bank. So why did Pope Benedict XVI resign? Well, going back to 2009, 2010, there's a shakeup in the Holy See with the Vatican Bank. And who is right there in the middle at the bullseye? Vigano. Vigano is the one that's shaking things up, and it leads to secular intervention and an accusation of money laundering. The head of the Vatican Bank ends up getting fired. Vigano ends up being pulled out of the Secretary of State and sent over to the United States of America. But $54 million have come into the Vatican Bank, and there's a lot of questions. And the Vatilinks begins to break that open. And that, in turn, leads to Benedict discovering the moral rot of sexual deviancy within the walls of the Vatican. Something he may have suspected or not, but becomes clear when those three cardinals present the 300-page binder onto his desk. So really, it was a 4-punch knockout. First off, Vigano blows the whistle on alleged money laundering. 2, the accusation of money laundering leads to the Vatilinks scandal. 3, the Vatilinks scandal leads Benedict to form a secret investigation with 3 cardinals. And then 4, those 3 cardinals expose moral rot, sexual deviancy that's been paired up with financial irregularity. This is what moves the Pope to resignation. And just to make sure there's enough pressure on him to actually do it and to do it quick, something funny goes on with the Vatican banks beginning on January 1st, 2013. And it seems that the powerful cardinals, the powerful hierarchs within Vatican City wanted it to happen fast because they don't want the contents of that 300-page dossier released to the public because there's moral scandal in those pages. Now, that binder was left for the successor of Benedict, who is Pope Francis, but nothing has been done. And what we've seen in the years to follow is that those who were opposed to Benedict XVI, theologically, but also on administration, have been reinstalled, reinstated, and promoted. Vigano says that Benedict XVI put sanctions on Cardinal McCarrick in Washington, D.C., and that Pope Francis reversed them. If that's the case, we can see that within the walls of Vatican City, not just cardinals working secretly, but Pope Francis himself has been undermining the investigation that was prompted by Vigano as far back as 2010. So where do we stand now? Well, we have this 11-page document that Vigano has released to the public, and it connects the dots morally. He doesn't go into the financial. A lot of that stuff is already out in the public, though no one knows about it. But if you go back into the Vatilinks story, you're going to see Vigano is all over it. Could Vigano be lying? He could be. And if so, all this falls apart. It could just be that he's been a troublemaker from the very beginning. But if he's telling the truth, and other Vatican officials and other cardinals come forward and attest to what Vigano has been telling us, then this pontificate of Pope Francis is in big, big trouble. So there it is. Archbishop Vigano and the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI.
Well, there you go. That's some way down the old rabbit hole there now, isn't it, that we've managed to get with that. And he's right. The papacy of Francis is in deep trouble, and you've just seen how far back and how dirty the roots of this thing are. Maybe at last we're going to get some truth on the past abuses, some accountability, and some justice for those to whom justice has been too long denied. Pope Francis came to Ireland, he saw, and he was defeated. And that's left the papacy adrift. It's about time that this stuff happened, isn't it? Alright, that's it for this edition. I will be back soon with more, and I do hope you can join me for that. But in the meantime, with the beautiful truth, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.